Hey guys, this is Joshua Gibson here with the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. This is episode 26. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate all of your support. And if you're a new listener, I hope you enjoy some of the content that I've produced. I have a really special guest today. It is Jeff Wittmer. Jeff, thank you once again for joining me.
Oh, Josh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So just to give you guys a quick little synopsis of Jeff's background before he kind of digs in. Jeff's a really highly decorated weightlifter. He's won multiple national championships, both senior and junior, medaled at the Pan American Championships. He's a world team member, both senior and junior, and the list, you know, it really does go on. And that's a very brief overview. But Jeff, if you could maybe give us a bit more insight, a bit more like of the meat behind your background, how you got started into weightlifting, and how you stayed in the sport for so long. Because if I'm not mistaken, you weightlifted for well over 10 years, right?
Yep, I actually competed for right about 14 years or so.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I got started. I started when I was about 10 or so. I think on the podcast you did with Kyle, he said something about I started at 5. I don't remember that. But I started at 10. So when I was really young, I used to go to the gym with my dad, and we just like when he would working out, I would just watch him. I mean, probably when I was like 5, 6, 7, and then he would give me a broomstick and just like he'd have me practice squats in the kind of in the corner. So I to say that probably could have helped some as well, but I didn't really get started into actual weights past the broomstick until I was about 10 or so. I was playing soccer and baseball at the time. I was particularly small for my age. My dad competed in weightlifting for about 15 years. He competed from the age of 20 until 35. Competed at a few nationals. He's a 110 kilo lifter. He got his lifts up to, he did 150, 185. So kind of average national level lifter, and he kind of wishes he would have started younger, but he just firmly believed in strength training, and just regardless if you're playing a sport or anything, everyone should do it just for general health reasons. So he kind of had me start at 10 and really just started learning with, we went from the broomstick to a 10-pound bar and just really started just really basic, just 10 sets of 10 in squats and slowly, I remember kind of learning how to snatch, and he would just kind of guide the bar for me. And I was always thinking I was never going to be able to get this down. But, after the first couple months, it just definitely started to progress. And after about 6 months or so lifting, got into my first meet and just kind of gradually competed more and more locally. Then eventually they used to do the AAU Junior Olympics. So competed in some of those, and had some success. Actually, like one of my first 50 meets that were combined with kind of local and then AAU meets, and then along with like the USAW nationals, go to those. But I competed. I know my dad really believed in competing frequently. Mm-hmm. So there were some years where I was competing in a month, once a month in a competition, and we just kind of trained through the meets. But he always thought, if I was going to stay with the sport long term, that is, essential to get that competition experience, mm-hmm. Under your belt versus I think you do see some people kind of make the mistake where they don't want to go to a meet and lift until they get their lift to X amount. Mm-hmm. But, we view the competition experience as, as invaluable. It's just, and you'll see a lot of guys leave lifts in the gym. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of could be a cause of that, just not competing enough. So, from there, really, I dropped my other sports probably about the time, the soccer and baseball, at the time I was 14, 15 or so, and then just solely focused on weightlifting. I actually went to a competition in Canada. It was called a Louis Cyr competition. It was like kind of U.S. and Canada, and then this particular year, they had some European countries, not really the powerhouses in weightlifting, but they had I think there was Norwegian countries there, and I think some lifters from France, but it was a good first international meet. Mm-hmm. And ended up winning that. And, and I really just it was fun kind of being on a team representing the U.S. And I was like, why is my goal going to be to play baseball high school or whatever, or soccer. And I just thought this seemed a lot cooler to me. So, and I also did some training camps in Colorado Springs, the junior squad camps they used to have. And that's when I was really like, oh, this is cool stuff. I want to stick with it. So dropped everything else, kind of just focused on weightlifting, from there and through high school. Made some junior worlds team, then ended up going to the Olympic Center when I was 18. Trained there for about a year and a half or so, and then after that, just kind of competed through. That I left there. Then I wanted to focus more. I wanted to get my degree a little bit sooner. I know the pace out there. People were taking classes, a couple classes a semester, and there was a lot of reasons, but it just wasn't really for me, the lifestyle and the training out there. So moved on and was able to kind of keep competing through college. And then ended up kind of right when I graduated college was around the time I kind of got out of the sports, about at 24 or so. And just life kind of catches up to you kind of fast. And definitely was a tough first few years as far as transitioning out of the sport and kind of working a day job. And I still kind of kept trying to train, but I didn't really feel like I was could put everything I had into it. And so that's when I kind of was like, I don't see a point of doing something if you're not going to be able to kind of put everything you have into it, and train to be the best. And so that's why I was like, I'm just going to move on and do something else. But I definitely started missing it quite a bit. And that's where I got to where I actually kind of, after working a few years at one job where I was kind of on my feet a lot, I got a job with got IT company here in St. Louis, and kind of like software reseller. We do all types of stuff, but it was more of a desk job and a little more flexible hours. So I kind of had some more time to train. And when I had still always stayed in decent shape, but I was planning a comeback actually to, when I was around 30 almost, and I got back into my top shape, was hitting PRs and stuff. And that was kind of during the time, I think it was just kind of random, I'd been listening to, so it was kind of random. So I knew weightlifting was getting more popular. I thought it was pretty cool. And I always missed it, but I thought, I actually started listening to John's podcast. There was a guy at work that did CrossFit, and I look over and I see someone's listening to, like, on their screen, it says like John North, and I would have never thought that in an IT company in like St. Louis, and a guy's listening to podcasts. And I'm like, gosh, and I knew John had a podcast, and I actually started listening to it some there. And I know he said he wanted to do kind of his own meets and stuff. And I thought it was a really cool concept that I thought he was always kind of an outside the box thinker. And that's when I was like, you know what? It's like, that might be a cool first meet back. It was in Vegas. I always wanted to lift in a meet in Vegas. So I was training for that, and, obviously got on his podcast and developed a relationship with him. And a few months before the meet, I got in a pretty bad car accident, and actually flipped my car a few times, had 150 stitches stapled in my head, and tore the labrum in my right shoulder. So I actually unfortunately wasn't able to compete. And I was still able to squat a little bit, but couldn't go overhead. But John still had me out at the meet and stuff to experience it, and so I thought that was pretty cool. And then and then at that time I kind of led to getting back in the sport more as a coach. I was helping with Matt Bruce, that works for Brute Strength, himself, Michael Caju. They were doing primarily CrossFit programming at the time, and I've been friends with Matt for a long time, and he kind of brought me in to be one of the weightlifting coaches. So that pulled me back in. Worked for them for a few years, and then now I kind of stopped working for them about last summer or so. It was kind of hard to kind of juggle that. My family was opening a business here in St. Louis, working a full-time job. I couldn't really put everything I had into the athletes, and I think, and so it wasn't best for me to kind of stay on, and if I was only going to, half-ass it, per se.
Right.
So that was kind of the decision that kind of got me kind of back out of the sport. I still train some, but it's not really a whole lot of coaching. A little advice here and there for some guys I know, but haven't been too actively involved really since in the last year or so, really.
Okay, so there's definitely a lot there that I kind of wanted to dig into.
For sure.
Which is great. Like, I have a ton of questions kind of off that. As far as competing frequently, I think I've heard that advice from very renowned coaches. We were talking about Glenn Penley before off air, and I know Glenn is a big proponent of, compete as frequently as possible every week.
Yeah.
It's just a heavy training day. Now, what would your advice be to kind of implementing that style of training into someone's programming, so where they compete maybe once a month, and how you kind of approach getting ready for it, and then kind of what your advice would be to like up and coming weightlifters?
Yeah, I think it's good to, have that day of, at least have a day of the week where you're going fairly heavy, and you're kind of limiting yourself on the misses. Where like, hey, I mean, you see some guys will try to weight 6-7 times. It's just not realistic. That many attempts in a meet. I respect the persistence, but I don't think it really does you any favors as far as helping with your technique. But I think to implement it, I know it's tough to kind of do it on a monthly basis, but I think if you can kind of do as many like mock type meets or going heavy in training, obviously like one day a week. We used to have a day here where like once every Saturday, really a lot of guys from in town here in St. Louis would all meet up at one gym, and this was kind of this was some 15 years ago, where this was kind of before CrossFit. There was like 2 gyms in town where you could drop weights overhead. So we would meet up one was at a gym at a junior high that had a weightlifting team. And then there was this gym in the city that had like 2 platforms. So we would meet up at either one of those spots, and then we would go and we would meet up about 6-7 guys and kind of train heavy, train together. I think that helps quite a bit. So getting around other people when you're going heavy, as much as you can to simulate an actual meet.
Interesting. And kind of going along with your weightlifting career, I'm kind of interested to hear maybe what your favorite accomplishment was, or maybe the best accomplishment you've kind of had. And do you think that maybe, and this is a hard question to answer, but do you think that you fulfilled your potential as a weightlifter, or do you think you left some on the table?
Yeah, I'll start with the second part of the question. So no, I think absolutely not. I did not fill my potential. I think that's what was it was a tough pill to swallow when I got to like my upper 20s, because it was actually every day I would always kind of think about it, and then eventually I just got to the point, hey, I'm gonna try to mount a comeback here and see what I can do, and because it really, it kept me up at night. To be honest with you, it always was bugging me, and I had a lot of like friends in the sport were encouraging me to come back, and that's when I started training again. So. But his favorite accomplishment, I would say, it's a pretty easy one for me. I would say probably the best competition I ever had was at the 07 Pan Am Games in Rio, where I went 5 for 6 at 158, 197, had 203, clean 203, had it overhead, but it was the way I made the lifts. They were all pretty easy, solid, and just the preparation leading up to the meet was spot on for me. It was actually, that meet was during a summer, so I wasn't working or going to school or anything. So I had a good 10 weeks where all I did was just focus on training and focus on that meet. And then to be able to travel like that, I think I got there like a day or 2 before the competition. Didn't really have that much time to acclimate, and would still kind of come in and walk through all my lifts, and it set some PR snatch, PR total. So I think that was definitely I have to say that's why, even though I got 5th, I did not get a medal. It was a tough year. They had Julio Luna from Venezuela. He had come back. He was a world medalist. And there's Johannes Hernandez from Cuba competed. Eduardo Guatemala. So there's some good. It was a stacked. The 94s were pretty stacked. Where some other years a 355 total could get you on the podium, but unfortunately not in 07. But it was cool. Just competing there with some of the best guys in Pan America. So I would say that would be it.
Okay, so for some of us that are up and coming weightlifters, like, what were your experiences like at international meets in the back room? Like, because I've heard a couple people tell some stories, but I kind of like to get your opinion on it and your take on what it was like. Maybe like the tension in the room, how competitive it was. because a lot of people say it really is like a chess match. And I'm assuming if you have so many great lifters or that are all at the same level and trying to medal, it can become very complicated and become a really like almost aggressive atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, I would, I don't know, not necessarily, I wouldn't say like aggressive in my opinion, actually, but I would say, I would try not to watch what other guys were doing, but I'm kind of guilty of it. You might glance over and say, sometimes it throw you off when you see someone doing kind of like power snatches to warm up for snatches, and they're doing something like, they're like getting close to what your opener is going to be, and they just power snatch it, and you're like, oh, what the fuck is going on here? So, I mean, no, I think kind of watching some other guys, I mean, yeah, definitely like weightlifting, I mean, that's where a good coach comes in handy, but it can become it can become a chess match with weights and kind of maneuvering attempts and stuff. But I think one of the biggest things that people don't really take into account is if you look at some of those sessions at the Worlds or other meets, even I would kind of say nationals now, because there's a lot of people around the same level, to take into account the amount of temps and the weight that you have to experience. I think I competed at the 2006 World Championships in Dominican Republic, and I had 19 attempts between my first and second clean and jerk.
Wow.
But I knew going into the meet, I look at the start list, I know it's going to be, from all the guys that could, were going to place between 15th and 30th, there wasn't a huge difference in their total. So I was like, okay, they're going to be up again. There could be some long wait. So actually incorporating into my training to where, hey, I might work up to, say, I'll kind of get specific with the numbers, but say like, hey, if I'll clean and jerk up to 190 that day, and then I'll drop down and I'll hit 140, and then maybe jump up and do 180, then try 190 again, and just kind of mix it up with sometimes I would experiment with like big jumps in training, because essentially if you don't want to have to do too many heavy warm-ups, but to take energy out of it, but you want to have some form of a plan where what you're going to do with that weight. And in that particular meet, I think I kind of dropped down. I did some lighter, like power clean and power jerk, just to kind of get moving. And it was so hot there, we didn't want to take too much energy out, so we kind of just stuck with a lighter weight and just did about three singles there. Would wait a few attempts, wait about 4 attempts, then hit a single there, then went out for my second. And you have to kind of convince yourself, mentally, that the weight's going to feel pretty damn heavy from floor to knee, because you haven't had a weight, been pulling on weight that heavy could be for close to 20 minutes. But just getting past that, it was really is the only challenge. I think it's just that it's kind of can mentally psych people if they pick it up the first couple inches. It feels a little bit heavy. It's just getting past that, and you're fine. But I think that's something as far as in the back of the warm-up, I think people don't take into account or give people credit for when they they do go and make 5 or 6 lifts at some of these international meets, and you see they're right in the thick of it, and it's like, gosh, it's a whole separate battle of trying to stay warm and make your attempt. So I think that's a big challenge. I think people don't really like to talk about or give credit to people for overcoming that, that adversity.
Yeah, I think that's one thing we kind of as spectators see, like someone competes at a world championship and they do really poorly, but we don't take into consideration like the travel, the competitiveness, and there amongst the athletes. So have you ever, or let me rephrase this question, what's like the most impressive feat you've seen in person, maybe at a meet or maybe in the crowd? Because you've obviously lifted at a very high level. Like some of the lifts I've seen you do are incredibly impressive to me. So I'm kind of curious to hear your take on that.
Oh yeah, so I have a good one. So in 2002 Junior Worlds in Czech Republic, there was a 85 kilo lifter, probably, I don't know if you're Andrei Rybakov.
Oh yeah.
He was kind of almost considered a specialist at the time because his snatch was so much better than his clean and jerk. But and this was kind of coming off of, this is when Demas was still competing, and I think he and Andrei Rybakov snatched 182, a new senior world record at the Junior Worlds. And I want to say he was like 19 at the time, and the place just went crazy. I mean, I don't know if he opened up with, if he went like 75, 80, 82, something like that. I can't quite remember the attempts, but to see, and it wasn't that hard of a lift, and to see this junior break this, senior world record, and coming from like all the guys on our team, we kind of grew up watching Demas at the Olympics, in 92, 96, 2000, and then to see this junior from Belarus, get the world record snatch at 85s, you're kind of like, holy shit. I think that was probably one of the most impressive. Then also in that same meet, the senior world record in the 105 kilo class in the snatch also got broken. Marcin Delega snatched 198.5. And I think his attempts were 185, 190. Then he jumped to 98.5 for the record. And that was as a junior. I think his career, he only snatched ever a few more kilos more than that the remainder of his career. But to see those senior world records at the junior level, when I was like 16, it's just like, those were kind of those holy shit moments. I can't believe what I just saw. I mean, those are definitely two that stand out to me in my mind. And I'll tell you this, like at that meet, I was at 85, and my best lifts were pretty low. I mean, they were around like 290, and I moved up to 94s after that. But I had never been so motivated in my life, because I felt like just to be at a meet and not feel like you put a lot of time into weightlifting, and you think you're kind of decent on that national level and stuff. Then you go to that level, and just to really feel like a boy amongst men, It's like, I got to start changing some things. I got to train harder. And I think that really, really motivated me, where I actually went from, within about 5 months, I gained some body weight, probably gained about 4 kilos body weight, but I went from totaling 290 to 325. Actually, probably a little longer than that, more closer to 7 months, but I went to American Open and, totaling in the 320s. But just from that, really, I was really, really motivated me to kind of get my lifts up after seeing that.
So this is a perfect segue then. Like starting maybe at the beginning of your career, and you kind of talked about it when your father introduced you to the lift, but I'd be really interested in hearing how your training looked kind of from maybe age 10 to 18, and then when you went to the OTC, and then kind of after that, and where you saw the most progress, and maybe what you think were the key factors in kind of bringing about that bigger total.
No, absolutely. I think the key, for me when I was starting was the focus was on, the strength base while kind of learning the technique, but with really, really light weights, where I was actually doing I would back squat 3 days a week and front squat 2 days a week from when I first started. And so we were kind of constantly squatting to build that leg base. If I could do some things differently, I think I would have done more upper body exercises, because it got to the point where my clean was so far ahead of my jerk, because building up that squat base. But really, we always, the first few years, it was just a lot of focus on squats and pulls and then the lighter technique. And the strategy, like we always it wasn't a whole, I would say I was a little lighter on the volume compared to most people throughout my entire career. But one thing, we'd always focus on too was limit the number of misses, in training, and speed. So people could always ask me, and they said, hey, they'll ask me like, hey, how did you get fast? Or how do you always look like you're fast pretty much when you're lifting? I said, well, never practice really doing anything slow. Anytime if things got out of position or we'd slow down, we'd kind of drop down into weight or just stop that exercise for the day, versus doing kind of heavy, sloppy movements where you're going to lose in technique. I think, to get that really mechanical technique, I think you need to be careful as far as if you're going heavy, if you're going to do 180 poorly and it's really slow, and then I see people in the gym and they're not even close to a meet, and then they just keep adding more weight, and I view that as just being more detrimental. I just think general rule of thumb, that's going to build more bad habits. So it seems like common sense, but some people just want to neglect that and just kind of continue to put on more weight when they're doing it poorly. If you can't do 100 kilos properly, who's to say you're going to do 110 properly? So I think sometimes people just don't have that patience. They want to keep building to that, which kind of can lead to some inconsistency. But I mean, more specifically for my training, to answer your question, I think we'd really focus on there was one day a week where I was kind of do snatches, snatch pulls, and overhead and some squats. Another day do the power movements. Another day do clean and jerk, clean pull, and then some overhead and squat. And then Saturdays were always both lifts, snatch and clean and jerk, and then overhead. And then Sunday would be, usually I was fairly shot from Saturday's workout with kind of going heavier in the end of the week. Then we would just kind of go off blocks. Because if we were going to do something off the floor, most likely I'm going to raise my hips and it's going to be out of position. So then we would just kind of focus on block movements. And granted, the training kind of changed, periodically, but that was a pretty general template, that we'd follow. And the reps would really vary between, singles, doubles, triples, in the lifts, and doubles, triples in the pulls, triples overhead to doubles and singles. Really at squats, I went through some phases of doing, 8-rep squats when I was pretty young, kind of, as a teenager. If the meet wasn't close, we might have a workout, we'd do sets of 8. But really after I was a teenager, we kind of phased that out. Found that it was kind of better, kind of less is more type thing. Easier once you start having some tendonitis and joint pain, and wasn't so much where it was, 400, 500 pounds felt the same on my knee, because it was just tendonitis. It wasn't a joint issue. I think that's where sometimes people get a little mistaken. Like, hey, if you're having the more weight, it's going to do more damage. It does more damage to the joint, but if the issue is more in the tendons, that's where you can kind of get away with still adding the weight, but just minimizing the amount of time you're doing the exercise. So just doing lower reps, so you can get a little more out of it. But yeah, I think that when I went to Colorado Springs, that was a little bit different experience for me, because I was used to going heavy kind of every week, whether it be squats or in the lifts, in a little lower reps, where we would go like months upon months with, never back squatting over like 80%. And it was just a lot of sets where there was a lot of work between like 60 and 80%, where I was kind of used to doing more of my work between 80 and 100%, but less volume. So it was a little different style of training. And it was just it was a lot more volume. I would say a lot more variation in some of the lifts. So it didn't really work that well for me, particularly just because I was doing so much volume. It just kind of led to knee tendonitis. Then from there kind of led to, my technique wasn't quite as on point, because I wasn't doing the same amount of actual lifts. And sometimes we'd go weeks without doing the full lifts. It was just all kind of assistant exercises or off block. So it was a little different mentality. And I was there kind of at a weird time where I moved out there, and then the resident coach at the time, Jerry Matroslin, had, he had moved on. He had retired, announced his retirement 2 weeks after I had started there. But then he stayed on to kind of coach a few guys, which was odd, because he said he wanted more time for his family. But then he took a job as a CEO of, I think, Modern Pentathlon or something. So I think he just didn't want to coach anymore. It was really the truth to it. So yeah, and then we had there was an assistant coach there who kind of helped. Then eventually Paul Fleschler, came in as resident coach, and I did a little better under Paul's programming. It's still a little heavier on the volume and a little different from what I was used to, but I thought he was able to kind of clean up some of the technique issues I had been having. But I think definitely a different mentality in the training. When I was out there, I can't really speak for, I know there's been several coaches, a couple coaches since then, but when I was there, I thought it was not enough actual lifts, not enough heavy squats, too much assistant exercises, too many reps, too much volume. It's just a little bit it was a different approach that I had. And when I left, actually, so that was the only year in at the time, the 8 years I had been lifting. So from 18 to 19, that was the first year I hadn't improved. I just leveled off. Wow. And then I got home, and I know some of the coaches or people there, and I kind of told them, hey, I really just want to go heavier and kind of do a little less work. And I had people telling me, oh, that'll never work. I said, okay, so I'll see you at Nationals next year, guys. And so I went from clean and jerk around 180, and then at the Nationals I clean and jerk 195, and I actually lost a couple kilos body weight too. So I think I was 20 at the time, and I clean and jerk 195 at the 05. And I weighed like 89.1. So I probably could have been an 87, 88. I'd been weighing really light before that meet, but clean and jerk 95. And then I actually, the most I had tried going into that meet was 190 was my best. I opened up with 185, jumped to 195. I was trying to make the senior world team, and I needed 202. And I never tried before went over 190 before. And so that meet we went 85, 95, and then I actually racked 202. And then it was a little forward. That was the first clean I had missed in years. But it would have been a 12 kilo PR. But yeah, so I think I thought that was kind of proof in what I was saying, because I was able to get stronger and do less reps and not even, put any body weight on or anything. And I was able to get my lifts moving. But then when I got so kind of into my 20s, I had some injuries, some injuries here and there. After that meet, when I did the 195, I really thought, oh, geez, I was like, I'm going to be clean and jerking 210, 220 in no time, because of the way the weights were feeling, the way I was moving, how my lifts were going. And it just, you learn that going from like 180 to going from 160 to 180 and then 180 to 200 is just kind of a different ball game. It takes a little more time for that to happen. And it definitely, it feels a little different. It's a little different level. So I didn't improve as fast as I would have hoped. But, in my 20s, had some challenging times where it kind of balanced. My training it had some really poor meets. I would say kind of after that 05 nationals, and leveled off for a good couple years. And then, 07 kind of started to hit my stride again, and had a good meet at the Pan American Games. I changed some things with my training where I was utilizing straps too often. I wasn't really working my weaknesses. My weaknesses became overhead support strength and grip strength. Mm-hmm. And the grip strength, it's kind of pathetic to mention, because you're like, hey, weightlifter's got to grab a bar, and to allow yourself to let your hands to get so weak to where you can't keep a hook grip and the bar's slipping out of your hands, even though you can squat a house, you're super strong. But that was the one weak link where the bar was kind of, when I got past the second pull, I'm going into the third pull, that my hands were slipping. So what was happening was that the bar was losing tension. And so it was kind of just this floating sensation. I would pull it still high enough to make it, then I'm going under the bar and the bar's just falling, because it's just kind of floating on me. And then I'd go under, and it was pretty standard where you see me at meets. I go and make an easy opener, then maybe tear a callus, and I'll miss my second and third attempts. I'd pull it really high, then I'd miss it forward, and it would just fall fast. And it was just, we kind of had my dad at the time. I was kind of training on my own at the time too. I was going to, after I came back from Colorado Springs, went to school locally for a little bit, then moved away, went to school at Missouri State University, a few hours away from St. Louis, and was just training in a sports performance gym kind of by myself. So there was a couple bad decisions I made as far as my training, like the overutilization of straps. But phasing that out, we had a meeting and kind of talked to my dad, talked to some other coaches, and we really just talked about a couple of the weaknesses. It was the overhead support strength and the grip strength. So what can we do to improve that? So we worked a lot of grip exercises, a lot of kind of started doing overhead support work where it's kind of holding the jerk and the split, for 5 seconds with, 80 to 90% weights, and just kind of help with that stability. And then, that kind of led to some PR totals, kind of was stuck around the 330s, and then got up to the 350s from there.
So you kind of talked about moving training environments quite a bit. So My question is, through all of these peaks and valleys where you went a few years without kind of plateauing, how did you stay motivated, and how did you continue to show up to train? I mean, I'm assuming you had to train by yourself some of the time. So
it's a lot of the time.
What were you telling yourself? Because a lot of people cite that as a reason why they can't reach their potential, is because maybe they don't have the environment or the resources. But I mean, a guy that's kind of training in his own gym, working out by himself, it is tough. So what advice would you have to the listeners?
I think at the end of the day, all those are just kind of excuses. I mean, I think you can still be successful and train on your own. It can be more challenging, but the first 5 years of myself lifting, I didn't have any training partners. It wasn't until I kind of got a little bit older where I can meet up and train with some guys. I think, it's definitely, getting through rough patches like that where you're just leveling off. I think it just kind of, for me, came with experience in the sport where I know it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're not going to put 20 kilos on your total all the time. And I think just coming to that, realization that sometimes you have to break through some barriers, and it gets harder and even harder before it gets easier. And just to keep working at it and keep trying to work on your weaknesses, and and eventually things can kind of piece together. But I think it's just a constant assessment of what you're what you're doing, what you need to improve on it, and making those tweaks. Where I think I got to the point to where I was just I was coming in training and wasn't really making a whole lot of adjustments, and I didn't really stop and look at what my weaknesses are. So I think it's just having, if you're training on your own kind of without a coach, I think it just kind of comes to that self-awareness and reflecting at the end of the week to see what's holding me back, what areas do I need to work on. And I think that's a lot of times where people will go wrong, where, hey, they might, I might say to you, hey, Josh, I have this great training. I have this great training plan for you. I'm going to hand you this manual, and you follow this to a T, and you're going to be successful. It doesn't really work that way. I mean, it really takes, I think, to really get the most out of it, your training is you have to make those adjustments for kind of how you're feeling on certain days and how you progress, on the program, and where your strength and weaknesses constantly lie, and how you can, I think a lot of the way this is about, adaptation, like how can you adapt your training to, fill any gaps that you have, on a regular basis, versus just going in and saying, hey, you follow this plan to a set T that everything's going to work out perfectly for you. And, it really doesn't typically work that way. And maybe if you trained in, an environment where there's zero variables, where, hey, maybe you don't have a job, maybe you don't have a family or girlfriend or, whatever, and you can keep things perfect. You're eating the same food and the quality. There's none of these other variables. You got to think like people are human beings. There's a lot of variables and a lot of things changing, and whether it be personally, professionally, or whatnot. I think you just need to make adjustments for that. And I can say, like, hey, when I was kind of like writing programs for people, with brute strength, and I know we were kind of doing weekly check-ins with people, I knew who was getting ready for a wedding, or who was having some issues with their job, and it was really stressing them out. How can we make some adjustments to kind of work around that and combat those everyday stressors that you just see in human life? So that's why I think you just need to have that flexibility and to be able to adapt and make changes.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, because it shows like the depth of you as a coach caring enough to see those things and make changes. But I think that a lot of people are under that misconception that, like, I have to do what the program says, and they don't realize that, like, programs themselves are ideal, but some days you might perform better than normal, and why not go for a PR? Or some days you might look worse than normal, so pull back. But like sometimes people are so taken aback by the fact that you want to change something. I think it's a good idea to kind of aware people to the plasticity of a training program and how much it should be able to change based on the circumstances, because like you said, everything isn't always ideal. And even when it's really good, you might be a little more stressed out than normal, or your food intake might change. So it's always hard to keep track of those things.
Yeah, and I think too, another thing as far as advice for people out there, it's so much. I look at all the information that's out there now, and kind of at your fingertips. Where before, really, we used to look at old. This is in like the 90s, but look at like old strength and health magazines and look at the, to kind of look at some of the technique. We were just looking at the pictures, and then you had Iron Mind videos started coming out, so we'd order those, and we'd order all the training hall videos and kind of watch and try to learn some from that, and just kind of from the VHS tapes. And then you could pick up some good articles here and there. But now it's like, gosh, there's so many people out there doing seminars. There's so many people out there just shooting videos on tip videos and different drills to work weaknesses. All the information's out there. I think the most challenging part though is what do I listen to? Everyone, this guy says this and this guy says that thing. So I think that is one of the downsides of having too much information. It gets hard for people to decipher through, and it can become confusing. I'm saying this is, and I'm speaking as someone that, hey, maybe who doesn't have a coach and they're kind of looking for some of that guidance. But a good way to look at it is it's the track record of success. I have so many people they'll say they might be following a particular program, but hey, that program, I always ask, well, who has it produced? And they say, well, and they don't really know. It's like, so you're going to give me this piece of paper, this program, you want me to buy into it, but no one has succeeded on it. I said, I'm not buying what you're selling. Like, I can't do it. I'd want to go to someone with, because now there's, everyone and their mother has a, online training, offering online training. And I think it's kind of confusing. It's like, I'm not saying you have to be a great lifter to be a great coach by any means, but I want to see some track record of success. It's like, I'm going to buy Glenn Penley selling something, I'm probably going to buy it because he's had a track record of success working with athletes. He's proven yourself. I know you know him. I said, I think you just need to use your best judgment there and just look who has it, produced and who's it worked for. And, I think that's an easy way to kind of look at it versus if you just see someone who maybe they're not qualifying for national meets and they have no valid track record as a coach. I'm going to say that's a high risk investment to take their advice or to buy, into anything that they're selling or any programming. I would go to someone with a track record of success and, let that person maybe in time work their way up and get some proven people. But I think that takes time. So it's one thing just to be trying kind of on your own path and, training.
Yeah, I know Chad.
Seems like common sense.
Oh yeah, it really does. And I know Chad Wesley Smith, the guy that created Juggernaut. He kind of has this little system, and he said that someone should have 2 of 3 things. They should have been a great athlete, a great coach, or be educated. So they need to be 2 of those 3. And myself as a coach, I kind of take pride in the fact that I train just as hard as the people that I program for, and I'm kind of in the trenches with them because you get to experience the same things, and you know what it's like to go through that struggle of maybe plateauing for a few months or a few weeks or a year, whatever it is, and having to work through that and come in every day and show up and put in the work. And Jeff, you came up at a time, like you said, where there weren't all these resources, and you were able to just develop as an athlete. So kind of before we move on, I would like to talk about technique maybe. Just touch on it briefly. Like, as far as technique goes, do you feel like you have any influence from any different style, or is there a certain style that you prefer over others? Like, I know the Russian style, they have more arm pull or upper body use, whereas the Chinese tend to stay more vertical and use their legs more. So I don't know if you have kind of an opinion on that.
Yeah, I think. Really, I think there's so many different styles out there that can be effective. It's just determining what can be effective, for you, for your body type, for your strengths. Me personally, my legs are a hell of a lot stronger than my back, where, I could go and, I'd like to lift with more of a hips down style with my shoulders almost in line with the bar, not very far with the bar. But hey, if you let's look at someone let's say Norik Vardanyan, where he had a narrow stance, shoulders over the bar more, and he used a lot more back. But I can't RDL 300 kilos like he can. He had a very, very strong back, and he was able to, he lifted a little further over the bar and used more back, and he was able to make it effective because it played to his strength. Then on top of that, exceptional timing with the bar, so he didn't really need as strong as legs as other people. But as far as my influence on technique, I think what's influenced me. I think definitely watching a lot of European lifters and looking at some of their, at some of the styles of people lifting. But I think there's some basic fundamentals I need to follow. For me, I know some people can get away with the early arm pull. I'm not really a fan of it, or when I'm coaching, I'm not really a fan of it. I think it's okay if you pull early and you keep pulling with your arms, and you don't rebend them. It's okay. I don't know if you've ever seen, actually, there's a video out there that Danny Camargo explains it very, very well, the early arm pull, how to make it effective if you are going to use it. Mm-hmm. The problem is a lot of times you'll see guys or girls a little bent early with their arms past their knee, and then once they put their hips into the bar, their arms just re-straighten. Mm-hmm. And so, and I don't know as far as the effectiveness if they're just pulling with their arms to get the bar in closer to them or how that necessarily works, but I never found it effective if I tried to use it myself or coaching people with it. But I think a general fundamental is, obviously keeping your arms straight, shifting the bar high. I mean, there's one common occurrence, between most really good lifters. It's like you're not going to see at the top level a whole lot of people with with poor timing, with with a bar crash or things like that. I think catching the bar with elbows up. I just think it's those basic fundamentals where you can succeed. And I think one of the biggest, and this is I don't know, you're probably familiar with like Ian Wilson.
Yeah.
And I always heard and I brought him up on other podcasts I do, because I'd always hear people say that Ian Wilson has bad technique or poor technique. So he does not. If you watch the fundamentals of what he's doing, I mean, the fundamentals are so good. He doesn't have to be super smooth or perfectly kind of in line to lift, because the fundamentals are that good. If you watch his timing, you watch his positions, they're all spot on. You watch those jerks, he's got a deep split, but his hands and feet are hitting at the same time. The bar's coming straight into his chest. He's shifting high into his hips. He's not kind of raising his hips off the ground. It's just these basic fundamentals that he does, as good as anyone. And he, on top of being strong and tenacious and all that, where he's been able to make it effective. But I don't know. I'm sure you probably heard someone say, like, hey, his technique's not any good, or people will question it. He's not super smooth. I'm not going to argue that. But the fundamentals of his technique are exceptional. But people don't want people want to look at, hey, it's not the smoothest look to it, or it's a little crooked here and there. But no, it's the other fundamentals that they're not really looking at, and that's why you can do 175 and 215, or I don't know, he's at 212 or something. But he's making a comeback, which is kind of great to see. So that's kind of one of my favorite examples I like to use, like talking technique.
Yeah, my buddy, he kind of made the point that Ian looks like more of a rugged lifter, and I actually kind of like that style, because I guess my technique, it kind of looks a little rugged too, and there's like a little grit to it, and people kind of, it just looks like there's more effort there. Sometimes you'll watch like Chinese lifters, and it's like a world record attempt, and it looks so effortless, and like that's beautiful and great in its own right. But I like seeing that effort in a lift.
Yeah, and there's a slight jerk off the floor, kind of when he's starting to pull. But here's the thing, though, he's not breaking down when he does that. When he's jerking off the floor, it's not like his back's rounding or his hips are shooting up or anything crazy happening. There's no chain reaction off of that jerk that's negative.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of what you have to just dig a little deeper into it and really look at it. To say, hey, it's not, just because it's not smooth doesn't mean it's not effective.
Right. So like another part of developing someone's technique, and I noticed this with you, is creating a dynamic start. And I actually think yours is like really cool, and I kind of want to try it, but I don't even know how to begin. So how did you start using that kind of like, I don't even know how you would phrase it, but like tightening up into the bar and then initiating that pull? Like,
sure.
Was it just trial and error? And then how would you recommend somebody else try and find a start that works for them?
Yeah, I get so many people that ask me about it. And it took a little while to kind of get it. For me, it was just all about kind of getting comfortable. Probably as I was coming up, I was always trying to find a different position to start in, because I never really felt comfortable. Then and another thing too, you see all these people doing it differently, where you see people kind of doing that like dive bomb start. We just reached, like Wes Barnett used to do. Just grab the bar and go. And you see people doing that, and it's just like, okay, what would actually work? And I had tried. There's people that say, oh, you can get this hamstring reflex if you raise your hips up and go down. You hear so much different crap, you don't know what to really follow. For me, I sometimes right before lift, I have to think a little bit and kind of clear my mind. So I needed to be because I knew sometimes, especially in competitions, sometimes my mind would be racing. So I needed to be in a comfortable position to kind of combat that. And so that's where I got to where I'm just sitting. I would sit versus having my hips up and having to kind of hold your hips up. I would sit at the bottom and kind of wait till, hey, my mind's clear, everything's kind of good to go, where you feel kind of safe to start. And then from there is where I'm kind of raising my hips slightly, then going into my arch, because my back's not super strong compared to my legs. Just in general, my back's not very strong. So I really felt like I had to kind of force myself into that position to get arch. So kind of sitting down at the bottom, raising my hips up, slowly a few inches, and then throwing my kind of low back forward, pushing it kind of forward to kind of create that arch, and then go from there, and then focusing too on when I was trying to kind of work on this start, one of the things I was doing, I did it a little too aggressively when I raised my hips and then brought them back into the bar and trying to arch my back. I did it a little too aggressively, and I was throwing my head back, and so my head was going way back, and my head was so far back, I kind of kept going, and so it's kind of hard to use your traps effectively if your head's kind of tilted back. You want it a little more in a neutral position, it would really help in that final pull. But I would say the lifters that I'd watched it was Kaki Kakishvili. I think he's the multiple time gold medalist in the Olympics. Originally from Georgia, competed for Greece. I think he's one of the national coaches for Georgia now. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he would sit down there at the bottom before his lifts, and then all of a sudden he just raises hips a little bit and go. And his is he doesn't kind of raise his hips as high as me. It looks a little bit different, but that's where I kind of would watch him and just see how he kind of start. And he lifted we have very similar leverages as far as shorter legs, a little longer arms, and similar torso lengths. And so I did take note of that. We were same exact height. And same weight class, so I was kind of looking at that. Hey, this can kind of make sense to me. In a very similar bottom position too, so there were some similarities that I saw in him with my leverages, where I was like, okay, hey, maybe I can make this kind of style work a little bit, but I can tweak it a little bit. It's something people don't really talk about because it is important before you're going to lift a heavy ass weight. You want to be comfortable down there in the start and be in a position to where you're feeling good. And you'll see people kind of tweak it a lot, but sometimes it can kind of make or break the start of your lifts. If you start out poorly, you're more than likely going to finish the pull poorly.
Yeah, I kind of have that same thing that you did, is where like my mind will really be racing, especially if I'm taking a really heavy weight, like 95+%. I need like some sort of start to just like help me shut it off a bit. And I do something similar where I like pull back against the bar and kind of set my lats and then initiate the pull. And I feel like that just helps me. When I do that, like the lift has started and I'm going to stop thinking. So I think it's really useful.
Yeah, I think too. You'll see. I was in a way kind of envy some people that just feel like they could just watch them. They walk up, just grab the bar and go, and their minds were just super clear. They wouldn't overthink it. And so it's like, but yeah, for me, I was always thinking a little bit too much. So getting in a comfortable position where you can kind of clear your head, I think is key. Unfortunately, you have to find ways to combat it.
Right, and just kind of before we touch on this last section, that's kind of just like kind of philosophical questions to kind of go along with the name of the podcast. But who is your favorite lifter, or who is your favorite lifter? You just enjoy watching like over and over again.
Gosh, there's so many out there. I would say from like a technical perspective, I really liked the Russian guy, Apti Akatov. You say his last name. I think he's banned or something right now. But just looking at it from his, if you look at his technique, I just thought that mechanical style where he just looked like a machine lifting. It always looked the same. He actually transitioned from a split jerk to squat jerk. But I think he's one of my favorite to watch because it's just to make it look effortlessly and so solid to me that I'm like, oh, that's what doing a snatch should look like if you're doing it right. Same with clean and jerk. So I would say he was one of my favorites to kind of watch, where sometimes I'll kind of I'll kind of look at some of his older videos and stuff. But I mean, I guess favorite lifter outside of that for other, for personal reasons, obviously like my favorite lifters like Fernando Reis, the super from Brazil, competed against him in 2007, the Pan Am Games, became friends with him. He ended up coming actually to my city here, St. Louis, and going to college. And I went down there and trained in Brazil with him quite a bit. So building a personal relationship with him. So he's, obviously my favorite lifter for personal reasons. And to see him, what he's been able to accomplish has been, remarkable. When he first kind of came, I remember he came here to visit before he officially moved. I mean, he was to see him like at that point, he was moving up from 105 to super, and he was missing like 190 cleans, and you see him now, he's snatching 200. Yeah. And he was a guy that probably, with the exception of just a couple things, everything he said he was going to do, he did. He's like, I'm going to medal at the Junior Worlds. I'm going to get my list to this amount. I'm going to go to, all these goals. That he had these goals at such a young age. And, I would say the goal obviously was to get a medal in Rio, and he got 5th. But I think I always just respected him because he would set these goals out, and he would just, even how far unrealistic, they seemed. And I think he had told me he wanted to total, 450 at the Olympics in 2016. And he told me this like in 2009, 7 years before. And to get to within 10 kilos of that is pretty damn good. Mm-hmm. And I just have never seen anyone kind of predict what they're going to do, and just to have that type of, as strong as will as him, just someone I really respect as an athlete and as a person.
Yeah, I actually recently messaged him about having him on the podcast, so I really hope that kind of comes through, because I think he'd be an interesting guy to talk to, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, has so many great stories, and just his training philosophies, and he's been able to kind of pass on stuff he knows from his coach and his experience, and he's he's definitely a great resource, and just a funny guy, good guy to be around. I think one of the things for him is really what's helped him go so far, I think, is his mentality of he's one of the most positive people you'll ever meet in your life, and he'll always find the best out of any situation. And I'll tell a really quick story he was going to school here, and my dad is actually in the hospital. He collapsed at the house, and I'll kind of skip all the details, but he had a bacteria infection that reached his spinal cord and was kind of eating away at his vertebrae, and was and he had went from weighing 240 pounds to 195 pounds. Fernando came and visited in the hospital, and Fernando, the only thing he could say was, this isn't so bad. He goes, you get to just chill, watch some TV, don't have to go to work, just chill, relax for a little bit. And I go, Fernando, my dad's in quite a bit of pain, buddy. And he goes, oh fuck. He goes, sorry. but that's the way his mind think was. He always looks at the bright side of any situation, regardless of how shitty it may be. Hey, at least you have this, so. And he always can put a positive spin on anything, and I think that's what's helped make him such a great weightlifter, because you go through so many challenges, and just being able, I think it's people forget how important it is to just keep a positive attitude and mentality of how that can help your training on a daily basis, or going to competitions, or I've seen him train poorly going into a meet, but he can kind of overcome it because he knows, like, hey, I have this backlog of training. He just looks at everything in a positive manner. I can go into this meet and kind of put some of these bad training days in the past and go out there and perform. So having that strong mentality, so he'd be a great guest for you.
Awesome. So a question I have, kind of I wanted to wrap up with a few questions, but this one's kind of off the topic of those. How did you deal with bad training days? Like, I know sometimes people can get a little mental if they have really bad sessions. So, like, what was your self-talk when you had a day where it just seemed like nothing could kind of be put together, and maybe if that was like leading up to a meet?
Gosh, it almost would have to, I mean, definitely you have those days where you're just completely off, and it's definitely hard, but I think you always have to try to find a way to take some sort of good out of the workout, or get some sort of quality work in, whether it be in one of the other exercises. Hey, I didn't snatch the cleaner so well, but I'm going to try to, push the squats, or get some sort of win out of the day. And I think also too, is kind of a cop-out answer, but I think you have the realization that this is an extremely technical sport where there's so many different variables that go into it, and things could be a little bit off one day. I mean, in my opinion, it's like a game of inches, almost like golf to a certain extent, where if something's a little bit off with your technique that day, it's not clicking. You can miss a lot of lifts. And I think just come to the realization like that, it's the reality. So you're going to have those bad days, but guess what? Tomorrow's a new day. And I almost, sometimes leading up to, the week out of a meet, I would never want to feel good. I would always want to feel a little bit off, because if I'm moving really quick, I'm real snappy. A lot of times I've ended up peaking too soon. So if you have a good backlog of some training lists from 4, 5, 6 weeks out, but guess what? You're not feeling too good 1 week out, 2 weeks out. Well, guess what? That's not the day of the meet. It's like, so those aren't when you want to feel good. You don't want to be perfectly prepared, a second or third week out where you're moving super fast and you're feeling really strong and the weights are flying off the floor. You want them to feel a little bit heavy still. My best meet for always when I felt the shittiest a week out. And so I think for people, advice for when they're prepping for a meet and you don't feel spot on that week out or 2 weeks out or your last heavy days. Well, I've seen so many people in that last heavy snatch or clean and jerk day, where whenever it may be between 7 and 14 days, whenever they pick to take one or the other, or both, they'll hit a PR or something at session. I'm going to PR again in the meet or whatever. They ended up leaving that lift in the gym. That doesn't even, they end up doing 5 to 10 kilos less than that. So I think just keep that in mind. That's what part of peaking, peaking is you want to peak the day of the meet. You don't want to peak a week or 2 weeks out from the competition. So that kind of answers your question.
What was your approach to like a peak and then a taper? So how did you ensure that you were going to be a little more beat up leading into the meet rather than feeling so fresh, like you said, that you would almost PR in the gym?
Yeah, and I would still do like triples in the squats, like leading up to 2 weeks out and still heavy. And then I would switch to doubles and singles. But, I would still squat up until like 10 days out to almost a week out. I was still doing some pretty heavy squats. And then we'd have a structure as far as when we're taking our last heavy days. So typically, like, we take the last heavy snatch day, typically like 10 days out, last heavy clean and jerk about 12 days out. And so, but really it wasn't strategically cutting out the volume up until about 2 weeks out of the.
Rarely was I feeling too fresh, the meet.
Sometimes people can get in those scenarios where you're like 3 weeks out of a meet and you're feeling a little beat up and you want to take that light week.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take that light week. Still just fight through the pain and work through it, because if you don't, what will end up happening is you'll end up peaking too soon. So I think that's one of the biggest advice too. If you're feeling crappy leading up to those last 2 weeks out, to try to work through that and keep training hard, keep pushing it, and then peak, then start lightening the volume, when you get closer to the meet.
Well, that's really reassuring, because I had a shitty snatch, clean and jerk session on Friday, so I'm hoping that I get something out of that.
When's your competition?
It's Saturday.
A lot of times a week out of the meet, I might work up
opening snatch and my last clean and jerk warm up a week out.
Okay.
And that was kind of, that was kind of more towards the end of my career. I think when you're lifting lighter weights and a little, like when I was younger, I could go a little bit heavier, like a week out. But that was kind of the system you go off of. You work up to your opening snatch, last clean and jerk warm up a week out. There was times, I couldn't tell you how many times I'd miss my opening snatch a week out, and then I'd go to the meet and I'll snatch a PR. So I think, keep that in mind. You don't want to peak too soon. It's good. And it was always funny because I'd do my opening snatch and it'd be a little bit hard. And my dad was like, "Oh, good, you're not peaked too soon." I go, "This feels like shit, though." He goes, "Don't worry." He goes, "You're going to be fine next week." And then just little stuff, cleaning up the technique, and then next thing you know, you're at the meet and you just like feel like a different person. If you peak properly.
So, did you ever get that at a meet where you would be warming up in the back room and maybe miss a heavy attempt leading up to your opener?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I had, there were some meets where there were so many times it happened where I'd be a little bit anxious in the back and you're just kind of thinking too much. And it's almost like you have so much anticipation built up because you got to think, you go months And I always try to play stuff through my head a lot. So I always try to think about, hey, how's this going to feel on the platform, or what attempts am I going to end up taking? I try to think in my head how the meet's going to go so much before. So then when I get in the warm-up room, you're just kind of like, oh, shit, and your mind's racing. And you're just like, I'm so anxious to get on the platform and just like have a successful day that I'm not putting the focus into my warm-up list, which is not a good idea. But I had some meets where I think I missed my – this was this happened at a couple meets. Several meets. I missed my last warm up 2 to 3 times, and then I would go out on the platform and be fine. It was just once I got out to the platform, like, okay, everything's good. Like if the weights felt really light, I'm just leaving it forward. It's a different story if they're feeling really heavy, but the weights didn't feel heavy. I just felt off, like position wise, and it was really just a mental thing. It was because I was so anxious and excited to be there and lifting. And another thing that I would say, some good advice I like to give people is you're a lot fresher typically if you did it peaked right, you're a lot fresher the day of the meet. So what ends up happening is that weight feels so much lighter on the floor where you're pulling faster floor to knee than you're used to. And so it can kind of throw off your timing into your hips and then into that final pull. So I always think about I wish I would have known this when I was younger. I didn't really get it until I was a little bit older, but just think more about squeezing the bar off the floor and easing it off the floor a little more, still forcing you to get that snappy finish. That can kind of help offset that additional speed you're feeling the day of the meet that could affect your timing. So hopefully that tip helps some. I mean, if anyone can use that, but that's what would help me. But also too, I think it takes just because you miss, I think sometimes too people get defeated in the warm-up room. If you miss some of your warm-ups, that, all of a sudden, like, the meet's over already. I'm going to have a shitty day. Just say, hey, that's in the warm-up room. It doesn't count. There's only one place where it truly counts. And so I think that's what you really have to focus on. So I've had some days where I've gone 3 for 3 in the snatch after missing my last 2 warm-ups. Funny, at the Olympic trials in 2008, I'll tell you a really quick story. So I was working, my warm-ups were awful. I felt off. I was overly nervous. And so when I was working up, I missed my opener. I had turned in was 155. Plan was kind of to go, 55, then 60, or however we wanted to strategically pick the attempts, but to get the 155 in first. And so my warm-ups, I think I was going to go in the back. I think I was going to go it was like I think we were going to go, I'm trying to think, 125, 135, I think, and then like 42.50, then go out for 55, was something along the lines of that. But so I missed 35 in the back, wow. 35. And we go, okay, well, we don't have, it was high enough, but it was just forward.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we go, okay, we're going to try 40, we're going to go 42. And so we'll go up to 42, just whatever, just move on. Go to 42, I missed that. And then you go, okay, let's retake this. You go ahead, take it again. I miss it again. Not really even close. And then my dad and the coaches there at the time, we gotta lower you. I go, I think that's a good idea. I didn't fight it. And so my dad comes back and he goes, good news. He goes, I got you lowered. And then I look over and it's like Jeff Wittmer 154. He goes, there wasn't. He goes, there's not enough time. He goes, I said, you only dropped a kilo. He goes, that's as low as we can go. It's already, I think like Vardanian or someone's out there already lifting. He goes, that's as low best I can do, man. And then I go, oh, fuck. So then we didn't even know what to do at that point. So we throw on. So I missed 35. I missed 42 twice. Then we put on 47. Boom, missed that again. So then I'm going out for 154 on my opener. The most weight I had overhead was 125. Because I missed 35, 42, 47. So the most weight I had overhead that day so far that I actually held and stood up with was 125, and I went out for 154. I go out, I'm just like, fuck it, it's Olympic trials, I'm going to do fine, like no problem. I go out, pull it overhead, it feels so heavy, it feels like my elbows are going to explode. The platform was kind of slick, and I kind of had a wide foot stance, and my feet kind of slid out a little bit too, and I was a little flimsy underneath because I just was off and I didn't have any heavy weights overhead, and so it actually, my butt almost touched the ground on it, but I ended up standing up and making the 54. A little bit of elbow pain from it, so because it definitely felt heavy. Then from there I jumped to 157, and then I had 57. I pulled 57 overhead, stood all the way up with it, and it was just my elbow's a little sore, and the weight, it still just felt so heavy overhead, and it was a little shaky. And I'm literally almost, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing when this happens. You're like 3/4 the way up with the snatch, and I lost it forward.
Wow.
But I took a step forward, and then at that point, I was lucky to get that close with 57, then went out and tried 58, and then just missed it horribly forward. But really though, it for all intents and purposes, like I had 57 that day, almost stood all the way up overhead, but even on a day like, hey, I'm super off, I didn't snatch more than 125 in the warm-up room, I still almost went out and made 57. And I just knew, like, hey, I feel strong, but I feel off, so I just, whatever I have to do, just, pull hard and try to tighten up. You had to try to simplify things on a day like that, but I thought that was kind of an interesting story, and kind of, obviously upsetting looking back to say, hey, you've been training that long, you get to that point, and you're better than that. It was a little bit of just kind of some mental things going on that day where I couldn't piece it together in the warm-up room. So, no, that's definitely, it was a little frustrating.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the toughest things for me about weightlifting is, like, if you play baseball, I mean, you get 162 games or whatever it is, but like with weightlifting, like, if you're off on that day, like, that's it.
Yeah. No. And then you think of all the months and all the years of training that go into that one day, and you're off for whatever reason. It can be, it can be very, very frustrating. But yeah, I think that's what makes it, that kind of makes it fun too. I think and if you have a great day, think of all that hard work, kind of, it feels worth it. It's just, what always attracted me to weightlifting was it was very, very objective. Mm-hmm. As far as your performance. I mean, granted, hey, you can get robbed here and there from a judge, but it's not really a big topic. Maybe every once in a while it is, if there's one judge who's always red lighting. I think, you'll see our judges get nicknamed Red Light as their middle name or whatever over the years. But I mean, I think it's not really a huge controversy. I think in the sport, a big topic. Maybe it is now. I don't follow close enough, but no, I never felt like it was pretty much up to you. The rules are very clear; they're set out for you, and feels is more than 199. So I thought that's what really attracted me to it. And it's one thing I miss too, and even get frustrated, like now, like working in the corporate world, where we try to, I work in management and stuff too, and we try to come up with like key performance indicators that are objective for people. But it's challenging in the line of work we're in, and I think that it frustrates me sometimes that there's always more to, we're trying to get to these measures for people to tell them if they're doing good or bad, but there's just so many factors. It's hard to get it measurable. And at the end of the day, I mean, we're still at a point where we have to, hold, in our line of work, to hold people, subjectively, mm-hmm. To their performance. So it just requires a lot of engagement, I guess, from management to see how people are doing. But that's what makes it kind of miss, where I'm like, gosh, like, weightlifting is so simple. If someone's doing well, by the numbers speak for themselves. So it gets and I'm not saying all business or lines where like a lot of times the numbers can tell a good portion of the story, but with what I particularly do on a day-to-day basis, it's really challenging. To across the board have clear objective numbers to achieve.
Right. And okay, so kind of coming to this last section, I do have a couple questions I'd like to give your answer on. So the first one, these are a little bit away from weightlifting, but still kind of, like I said, more along the philosophical lines of strength training. Yeah. So besides the physical improvement, do you think it would be useful for everyone to resistance train or strength train? And what has strength training done for you?
Gosh, yes, I think absolutely everyone should do some form of resistance training. For me, and I can kind of relate now where, obviously like you work a desk job, you sit around all the time, and I've gone through some phases of not like working out as much as I'd like, and mentally, the toll it takes on me mentally is just incredible, where I start feeling a little bit depressed. I don't feel as good about myself. I'm not even thinking as clear because I'm too sedentary. I'm sitting there at a desk, I'm going home, I'm just sitting or watching Netflix or something or whatever. I just don't, I don't feel like I function as well. I mean, and for me, I think if I'm able to get if I'm in a good routine of like where, that's why I still try to lift heavy sometimes too, where like even in the lifts, just because I feel like it's like an outlet for me too. But just going in and feeling like mentally, I mean, obviously like doing like bodybuilding, even if it's just bodybuilding stuff or just movement, for me, the biggest thing is mental. And you just get that feeling of accomplishment. You put in a good workout, and I just feel like your body's a machine, and it's got to be. We're not made to, it frustrates me, I guess, now that lifestyles people have are so sedentary, but we're not made to sit. I mean, it's good that you see now like corporate spaces. There's like we have a gym now at our work. There's tread desk and things like that, but we're not made to just sit all day. And it just can lead to a lot of issues. We're made to be outdoors more. We're made to be active. So that's why, for me personally, like that's why, I think I've seen some weightlifters, their weightlifting career is done, and they never really experiment with any type of training other than snatch or clean and jerk, and their back or knees or shots. They can't do that. They don't really know what route to go, and they just go to just the getting fat route. Sorry, just being honest, but and I was like, man, I always want to stay in some type of shape and just at least just keep moving, doing something. Hey, if I can't do a heavy snatch or clean and jerk or squat, I'm gonna find something else that's gonna at least challenge me or just get me in there moving. So, for me to feel like just to function on a daily basis to my full ability, I need to be working out 5 or 6 days a week for 1 to 2 hours. I need to be doing some full body stuff. I need to be doing squats and just general fitness stuff. So just moving.
I've only seen pictures of you. I've obviously never met you in person, but the pictures I've seen, you were just jacked. So I don't know like what you look like now, or if but you were. It looked like you were in incredible shape.
Yeah, I did a lot. I incorporated a lot of like bodybuilding exercises kind of later in my career because you can't like lift. I couldn't lift quite as frequently, so I felt like I had to be doing something, and I just felt stronger like around my joints if I was going to doing some other exercises, and I could get away with it too because I started so young and I'm pretty flexible, so I could afford to tighten up a little bit, and I could still get in like the positions to get in the positions to lift. But I've maintained my body weight right at 94 kilos, around 210, and all. I really haven't taken any significant, in the last, 20, almost 34 now, but almost the last 24 years, I haven't really taken, more than a week off of training. There's been some phases where I might just go in a few days a week, but now I'm kind of back in a good routine of hitting 5-6 days a week.
Yeah, and I've seen pictures of you getting incredibly deep, like in a snatch or a clean, and kind of selfishly, I want to ask the question. I have like very good mobility. It's just I was born with it. I didn't really train it. But what's your advice to being able to maintain tension and catch in a position of tightness? Because I tend to just get pushed around, and the bar seems to want to like push me deeper into the bottom, and I can't stabilize it. So you started at such a young age, it's easy to develop that stability in the bottom, whereas like me starting a bit later in life. So I'm just kind of curious your take on that.
I still struggle with the stability some, and at the bottom, and I always felt that I always struggle with it the most if there was two things going on. If one, it was if my timing was off, say like the bar was crashing in a snatch and that stability, and the bar's falling on me, because it obviously makes the weight feel a lot heavier. It puts you in not as good position to where if it's kind of driving me down, it could force your hips back. And then also when my legs weren't, kind of weak, when my legs were weak or weren't in full shape, is when I felt a little flimsy, kind of at the bottom. But I think too, doing those exercise, anything where, like things like doing pause squats, I think there's a place for, I never did them a whole lot, like drop snatch or overhead snatches, things like that. But I think there is a place for that. I think it really it depends on the individual and where where you feel unstable at, whether it be overhead or, kind of in your hips. But when you get in those low bottom positions, especially for me, I got my feet a little bit wide, sometimes you just feel a little flimsy down there. But I thought getting my legs stronger, getting my upper body stronger definitely helps to feel a little more solid and tight. And then also the timing issue. So a lot of factors that go into that.
Yeah, of course, the simplest answer is the one that's hardest to do, and that's just get stronger.
It's kind of it's easy to say. It's just like, I mean, it's just going after the tactics, like I said, doing doing some of the pause squats, doing some of the the overhead stability exercises, whether it be drop snatch or some overhead snatches, and timing as well. Okay.
And the last question I have, this is kind of something I ask everyone that comes up on the show, because I think it's beneficial for all the listeners. So, what would you say is one thing that people could do each day to better their lives? So this can be outside of weightlifting, outside of strength training, just something that you would recommend people practice each day to improve their life.
Oh gosh. There's so many things I could say, but I would say right now, kind of current state with things, I think if you could take a couple hours away from your phone and computer, I think that's the thing that drives me crazy is, it's kind of annoying where the expectation now is that you're available 24/7, because everyone knows you have your phone right on you. And then it's like, hey, if I don't respond to someone right away, I'm a jerk, or I'm unreliable, or I'm not being an adult. But I remember back when we just had landline. I'm not sure how old you are, but if you're in your upper 20s or close to 30 or whatever. But we were growing up, and you had landlines, and if you're not home, someone leaves a note, your mom might give it to you or whatever. A couple days later, no big deal. Or same with your parents, someone leaves something in the voice message, I'll call them tomorrow. I think there's that expectation now that you're all with the technology, you're always readily available, and I think it can drive you a little bit crazy at times. And so I think taking a couple, and I'll try to do it at night, where I'll just kind of put my phone away and just turn my mind up, because a lot of people are probably guilty as you sit there, you're getting ready to go to bed, but I might be sometimes listening to podcasts can be kind of nice though before going to bed. So I won't necessarily say that, but you might just be flipping through Instagram or reading the news or checking work emails or doing something where your brain, you don't have time to shut it off. So I think every day, making sure you set some time away to get away from your phone and just to shut it off, and some time to yourself, or even if it's time with people where you're spending that time there with them sincerely, you're not on your phone half the time. So I think that would be my best advice, and it's something that I've been trying to work on too, where I got in the habit of going to the gym, where I'll go to the gym and I'll always have my phone on me and say, hey, someone could call me from work whenever, or there could be some sort of emergency or something, where I try to just want to focus more, and then I go to the gym and just kind of, hey, leave my phone in the locker or whatever, and just kind of go work out how it used to be. It seemed a lot easier to focus. So I've been trying to work on that and kind of putting it away a little bit at night. But I think that's one thing that bothers me, because it's always an expectation. And I talk sometimes about wanting to live retire in Montana, not have internet or anything, and just somewhere where it just be peaceful. But no, that's my, in a lot of words, that's my advice. Try to take an hour or two away from your phone and computer, and be active, do something, or just clear your mind.
No, I think that's a phenomenal answer. And it's funny because I actually had a similar conversation at the gym today. My buddy's, he's always on his phone when we're lifting, and I take this time to kind of decompress and unplug from the outside world and just lift and just enjoy my friends around me. And I kind of had this discussion with him, sometimes you have to be selfish and give time to yourself, because we're so busy giving time to others that we never have an opportunity to just kind of sit there and just reflect on maybe where we're at or where we want to be or what we're grateful for. And the more I read from authors like 100 years ago or 150 years ago, like all these guys were doing was literally thinking, because like they would send a message and it would take weeks, and then it would come back and it would take weeks, and it'd be like months before you heard from people. So that's actually really good advice, Jeff, and I'm kind of glad you brought that up.
No, that's something that definitely drives. I've always been one to kind of resist technology. Like I was in college and I still had I didn't have a phone that could actually send text messages until I was about 22. Because I was always like, well, I don't want to text. I mean, someone might as well send me an email. I was like, why don't they want to talk to me, call me.
Right.
Like, just call me and let's talk. Let's not go back and forth in a text. And so I was very resistant. I mean, because and it was frustrating people like, hey, I can't send you text messages. I was like, I have this flip phone. And then eventually I just gave in and got like a nicer phone where you can text and do stuff. And then I still kind of fought the iPhone thing up until like 2 years ago. I got one, but if it was up to me, I just, I think a cell phone's necessary, but I could do without the, all the features and stuff on it. But no, I think that's the one thing that can drive us crazy, and we got to be careful about.
Yeah, it's tough too with business nowadays. So much business marketing is done online and social media.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to be so present that it's tough to pull yourself away from it.
No, absolutely. You always, and then if you're not, then you feel kind of lazy too.
Yeah.
Because you have all this information like readily available to you that can make you better, make your business better. Oh, I can just spend all this time researching. Then you feel kind of guilty. But yeah, I think it is. I think if you resist it too much, obviously you fall behind, business wise and stuff. But I think still just take a little bit of time without it will not hurt. And like you said, going to the gym and enjoying it without being on your phone and enjoying the exercise and being around people you choose to be and enjoying that. I think it makes for better quality workout sessions too.
Right. So Jeff, I don't know if you have any plugs you'd like to give as we wrap up. I don't know if you want to give people your Instagram or your Facebook, or if you have any products or services. But if you do, feel free right now to kind of give that out.
No, nothing really to plug. Just at Jeff Wittmer Instagram. I haven't really been super active on social media, for some time. It's been a while, but I've been doing some more lifts, so maybe I'll put a little bit of stuff out there here and there.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And I kind of scroll through and watch all the old videos that you would repost and post, and there's some really awesome lifts kind of deep in the archive. So I'd recommend people go check that out. And Jeff, I want to thank you again for joining me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I had a blast having you on. So I'll let you know when I post this. And guys, thanks for listening. Guys and gals, thanks for listening. Thanks for checking out another episode of the podcast. And once again, thank you, Jeff.
No, thanks for having me, Josh.
And if you guys want to listen to any previous episodes, just feel free to scroll down, search in iTunes, the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast, SoundCloud, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time.